Do you think she'll hit the target with hands like that? The laughter crawled across the concrete like a sickness. I could hear it even before I stepped to the line, voices thick with mockery, boots scraping the dust, the metal clatter of rifles laid aside to watch a different kind of spectacle. I didn't look up. My hands moved by memory, checking the stock, sliding the bolt, adjusting the scope, though I already knew it wouldn't matter. They weren't watching for the shot. I was small, pale, my hair braided and tucked beneath the collar like I'd always worn it. My sleeves reached my wrists, but not enough to hide the ink that marked my arm, a black snake coiled tight, its body looped around a single bullet. They'd seen it before, whispered about it, some cheap biker tattoo, some Midwestern affectation. In the back, I caught the shift. A hush between the hoots and cackles. Then a voice, not loud, not commanding, but broken. Black Viper. I looked up then. Colonel Richard Stein. His face had drained of all color. The man who'd stared down mortar fire, insurgents, and politics alike, now pale as a dying moon. His lips formed the words again, quieter, like they tasted wrong. I said nothing. I just turned back to the range. 100 yards out, the steel target waited, its circle of paint already chipped and rusted by other hands. I adjusted my stance not for balance but for remembering. I hadn't fired a rifle in 7 years. I'd cleaned them, stripped them, recalibrated more rifles than I could count, but my own hands hadn't pulled a trigger since the Gulf. I told Sergeant Harris that much weeks back when he pressed me on it. I've shot before, I said. Where? County fairs. He laughed. They all laughed. I won't shoot, I'd said quietly, until I remember why I stopped. That answer didn't satisfy them. Instead, it fed them. They left their messes for me to clean, plates in the mess, gear in the barracks, rifles left filthy for inspection. I bore it because I knew what they didn't. Every shot is a name you never speak again. I lifted the rifle to my shoulder. The steel was cold, familiar. My cheekbone pressed lightly to the stock. Breath in, breath out. No tremor. No heartbeat in my ears. That's when I heard him, the colonel, his voice stronger this time. Stand down. Confusion washed over the instructors. Recruits muttered, not sure what game was being played. But I froze. My fingers still resting along the trigger guard. I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. The colonel wasn't looking at the target. He was looking at my arm, the tattoo barely peeking under the cuff. Black Viper, he repeated. There was a story in that name. A dead story. Because Black Viper wasn't supposed to have survivors. We were the ghost unit. The disbanded. The Kia without gravestones. The last to be sent in, the first to be forgotten. He stepped forward, eyes never leaving mine. I remembered him now, the way he looked younger, raw in the eyes, trapped atop Al-Karim's ridgeline. I remembered the glint of his dog tags in the sniper's scope, the spray of dust when the round caught the insurgent near his feet. He lived because of a rifleman he never saw. I lowered the barrel. I wasn't saving you, sir, I said softly. I was finishing a list. Then I raised the rifle again. 3 shots. The crack of the rounds was unremarkable, but the results weren't. The first shot clipped the topmost edge. The second split the left side. The third hit dead center, sending the steel disc swinging like a broken clock. That was shot 473, I told him. The first 472 were practice. The recruits stood silent now. No laughter. No whispers. I slid the bolt back, the casing ejecting with a whisper. I set the rifle down gently, my fingers brushing the black coil on my arm. And I said the truth they wouldn't understand. Black Viper wasn't heroic. We went where no one was supposed to come back. Then I walked off the line. It was Harris who stopped me just past the munitions shed. His voice wasn't sharp anymore, just tired. Blake! Wait! I turned. His eyes weren't hard now. They looked smaller, less certain. His hand flexed like he was about to say more but didn't know how. What was that back there? He asked. I didn't answer right away. The air behind the range smelled of oil and old cordite, burnt powder trapped in the concrete. I'd always liked that smell. I told you, I said finally. I was finishing a list. He shook his head. That wasn't just marksmanship. That was precision I've only seen in Tier 1 units. You were putting holes where no daylight should pass. I shrugged lightly, shouldering my rifle bag. I shot what I was told to. And the tattoo? He asked. Colonel Stein looked like he'd seen a ghost. He did. Harris exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. I checked your file, Blake. It says basic rifleman. No combat history, no citations. A blank. That's correct. But that isn't correct, is it? His voice dropped lower, cautious, almost reverent. "You're Black Viper." I didn't nod, didn't shake my head. Instead, I said, "I remember their names." That's enough. I left him standing there. At the barracks, no one said much when I returned. A few turned away from me, pretending interest in polishing boots or reassembling rifles. They didn't want to meet my gaze. Even their sneers had evaporated. But I caught glimpses. Them watching me trace the snake on my forearm absent-mindedly. I did it without thinking, feeling each scale ink deep beneath the skin, the curve of its body where it swallowed the bullet whole. I remembered the first time they branded us, deep in the field, after the first mission. We'd been told there wouldn't be medals. There wouldn't be ceremonies or acknowledgments. But they gave us that tattoo. A mark you didn't show unless you were prepared to finish what it started. I slept lightly that night. Dreamless. Just the distant echo of rifle shots in my ears, like a song I hadn't sung in years but still remembered all the words to. Morning came cold and bright. I was up first as always. Polished every rifle. Checked every bolt. Calibrated every sight, not because they asked, but because if I didn't, I wouldn't sleep again. By noon, the whole camp knew. Word had passed quietly but thoroughly. The Black Viper. Alive. Among them. A ghost walking. Some recruits looked at me with something like fear. Others avoided my path entirely, stepping aside like I carried a contagion. Only one tried to speak. Ramos. Young, wiry, too much anger tucked into too little body. "What's it like?" he asked when we crossed paths at the chow hall. I paused. What? To kill like that? That clean? That easy? I stared at him a long while. He wanted awe. He wanted confirmation of some fantasy where killing was power. Control? "It's like setting fire to a library," I said quietly. And then standing outside watching pages burn. Names you'll never read again. He didn't understand. I saw it in his eyes. I kept walking. At evening drills, Colonel Stein made his appearance. Rare. He didn't walk the lines usually. But this time he stood with the instructors as never leaving me. When the drill concluded, he called me over. "Blake." I stood at attention. At ease, he muttered. His voice was raw, as if something inside was still wrestling with itself. "I was at Al-Karim. I remember. You saved my life." I corrected him. "I didn't save you, Colonel." I crossed off a name. His jaw tightened. "Why?" "I was ordered to." He looked away for a long moment, then back. "You weren't ordered to save me." I shrugged faintly. "Collateral benefit." Stein stared at the dirt. The wind carried the scent of approaching rain. "I've read reports," he muttered. "What happened to Black Viper? They said no survivors." "Reports lie. Why did you come back? Why here, now?" I didn't answer that directly. Instead, I said I stopped firing when I forgot why I started. And now I remember. He didn't ask what that meant. Maybe he didn't want to know. But then quietly he said, "You're not a recruit, are you?" "No, sir." "What are you?" I met his eyes. Let the weight of it sit there. "I'm what's left." He nodded slowly, shoulders heavy, then stepped back, leaving me standing in the dying light. The next morning, they made me fire again. A live drill. Target set further than any previous mark. Weather worsening. I stood at the line. Shirt sleeves rolled back. The snake fully visible now, the bullet coiled in its mouth. "Take the shot," the instructor ordered. I took 3. Each one kissed the wind, found its mark. Steel rang in the distance like church bells for the dead. Silence followed. Even the recruits who'd once mocked stood still. Then I laid the rifle down, stood straight, and said, "This is shot 476. I walked away before they could speak. Later that night, I left. Before sunrise. On my cot, I left behind my M24, polished and wrapped in cloth. On top, a folded note. It said, "If you're reading this, you've decided to be a shooter. Don't shoot for victory. Shoot so no one dies. If you can save without firing, you're already the best." No signature. Just that. By the time the sun climbed over Fort Kingsley, I was gone. But they wouldn't forget. Not Stein. Not Harris. Not the ones who stayed silent. I didn't leave names. But I left the memory. The recruits found a framed photo later. Hung in the range hall. Black Viper. A title beneath it. Someone in every room carries the weight you can't see. Years later, Stein closed every first day briefing with the same warning. Remember, in every room, there's someone who's killed so that you can laugh. You just don't know who it is. And I carried my list still, names I never spoke. Pages burning behind my eyes. I crossed state lines before noon. No destination. Just miles. The country looks different when you've lived in the spaces between. Out beyond the highways where the land sits heavy and unspoken. Towns with names that don't stay long in memory. Rusted signs. Gas stations with one pump and a bell that chimes under your tires. I didn't need a map. Every road felt the same. Straight lines cutting through what was once forest, now just ground too stubborn to give up completely. I kept moving because stopping felt like drowning. Somewhere past the border, I found a diner. Small, wood-paneled. The kind where the coffee tastes like it's been brewing since the Nixon administration. I sat in the far booth, back to the wall. Old habits. The waitress came by, name tag said Diane, her hair piled up in a style 10 years out of date. Wadlit Bihan? Coffee. Black. She poured without comment. I didn't ask for a menu. Hunger was an old friend when I didn't want to wake. I watched the door. The windows. I couldn't stop myself. Diane noticed. Expecting company? I shook my head. Just watching. She refilled my cup anyway. You from the base? No. She glanced at the tattoo on my arm. The snake barely visible under the cuff. You military? I paused. Then answered the only way that felt true. I was. She nodded. Didn't press. Behind the counter, the radio played quietly, some old ballad about leaving towns behind. A voice full of regret, worn thin by years. I watched the trucks roll by on the road, hauling things no one remembers buying. A cycle of movement for the sake of movement. Then someone else entered. A man in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a sheriff's badge dulled with time. He nodded at Diane, then glanced around until his eyes landed on me. He crossed over, sat across my booth without asking. Morning. I nodded. Passing through, he asked. Maybe? You military? It wasn't a question the way he said it. More like a statement looking for confirmation. I didn't answer. You been to the old range up north? He continued. I sipped my coffee. Once. His eyes studied the tattoo. Black Viper. I met his gaze. He didn't flinch. Knew a man who wore that mark, he said. Died in the Gulf. Most did. That's so. I didn't reply. You're her, ain't you? He said then. The ghost. The one that didn't die. I set the cup down. Why do you care? Because folks don't just carry ghosts. Ghosts carry names. And sometimes names got kin still breathing. His hand reached into his pocket slowly, carefully. He wasn't armed, not in a way that mattered. He pulled out a faded photo. Edges curled, colors bleeding. Tell me if you know him. I looked. The face was younger. Smiling. Uniform pressed, eyes bright like he didn't know what the world could do yet. I knew the face. Kane, I whispered. The sheriff nodded. My brother. I closed my eyes for a breath. The weight of it heavier than the years between. He was number 218. The sheriff looked down at the photo. That mean he was on your list? I nodded. He die hard. I shook my head. Quick. Didn't feel it. He exhaled slow. The relief of a question carried too long. Thank you, he said. I pushed the photo back to him. I didn't save him. You remembered him. That's more than most. He stood up, pocketed the photo. Named Sheriff Dan Kane. You need anything, you find me. I nodded. He left. Diane came back, topped off the coffee. He was asking for his brother, wasn't he? She said. I didn't confirm it. But she poured anyway. World's heavy, she said. But some carry it quieter. I stayed until the coffee went cold. Then I paid and walked back to the road. By sundown, I'd reached the ridge outside a ghost town. Buildings sunken in, roofs collapsed like bones left too long in the sun. I sat by an old well, watched the sky turn the color of ash. I didn't build fires. Smoke attracts the wrong kind. The stars came out sharp and different. I traced the snake on my arm again, feeling the raised ink, the curve of the bullet. 218. Kane. I whispered the name like a prayer. Somewhere out there, lists still needed finishing. But mine wasn't written in blood anymore. It was in memory. And memory, I decided, was the only thing that could keep me human. I slept light. But for once I dreamed of nothing. Morning didn't wake me. Habit did. I stirred before dawn, sat still long enough to feel the cold in my bones. The desert nights bite in a way that makes you remember you're alive, even if you'd rather not. I cleaned my rifle, though I hadn't fired it since the range. Stripping it down, oiling the metal. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe because it was the only ritual I knew that felt like prayer. By first light, I was moving again. Footsteps light, steady, measured. Out past the ridge, I could see the highway, a faint pulse of movement, trucks and cars carving lines across the earth, none of them stopping. I walked along an old trail, half-eaten by sagebrush and thyme. Every so often, a bird stirred from its perch, startled by my presence. They always flew in pairs or flocks. I walked alone. At noon I found a rusted sign. The lettering half gone, but I could still make out the name, Teller's Bluff. A mining town once, or so the bones of it suggested. Nothing left but hollowed-out structures and wind. I passed a church, its steeple caved in. A graveyard sat behind it, stones crumbling like the names etched in them had given up trying to be remembered. I stood at the edge, eyes tracing the worn markers. It reminded me of the others, the ones we buried without graves. Men we couldn't carry out, so we left them in the dust and sand, memorizing coordinates we'd never visit again. I sat on the church steps. The wood groaned but held. There I remembered another name. Rodriguez. He'd carried a photo of his daughter, smudged from too many pockets. Shot through the neck in a raid that wasn't supposed to happen. Number 79. I whispered it. Let it settle into the air like smoke. Behind me, footsteps. I didn't move. The weight was familiar, not hostile but heavy. Someone accustomed to walking with caution. You're a long way from anywhere, a voice said. Male? Mid-30s. Crisp vowels, not local. I turned my head slightly. A man stood 10 paces away. Khakis, utility jacket, clean but worn boots. No weapon visible, but his eyes carried the knowledge of one. Maybe I like the quiet, I answered. He stepped closer slowly. Name's Mason, he said. I was told to find you. That's so. Colonel Stein sent word. I didn't reply. He waited, respectful of the silence between us. They're asking questions, he added. After you left. What kind of questions? About Black Viper. About the list. I looked away. The sky was turning pale blue, the kind that never commits to clear or cloudy. They want to know if you're still finishing it. I shook my head. No. He sat on the steps, leaving space between us. Why stop? I traced the snake again. The ink warm under my skin. Because finishing it means forgetting. I'd rather remember. He watched me carefully. They won't understand that, he said. They don't have to. We sat in the quiet. A wind pushed dust across the empty road. Mason spoke again, voice softer. I read about Viper. They called you ghosts. Hunters. We were. He looked down. I read your number was 320 confirmed. I shook my head. 379. He whistled low. I didn't explain. The number wasn't a boast. It was a ledger. A debt. Why do you come find me? I asked. Because there's another list, he said. And your name's on it. That caught my attention. I looked at him fully for the first time. Whose list? Not ours. But men with long memories. I understood. Retribution doesn't forget. It waits. Let them come, I said. He nodded slowly. I figured you'd say that. We sat a while longer. Then he stood. If you want to move, there's a safe house south of the canyon. Name still good. I didn't answer. He hesitated. You don't have to be alone. I smiled faintly. I do. He left without another word, footsteps fading like everything else. I stayed until the sun was high. Then I stood, dusted my pants, and walked into the church. Inside, light came through the holes in the roof, falling like columns of faded gold. Pews broken. The altar rotted. But the air carried a hush that made you forget your own breathing. I knelt, not because I believed, but because the dead deserve posture. 79, I whispered. Rodriguez. Then, 218. Kane. Then, 379. And still counting. The wind shifted outside, pressing against the walls like a breath. I didn't pray. But I remembered. That was enough. By dusk, I was back on the trail moving south. Let them come. Let them finish what they started. If they found me, they'd find the snake. And the bullet in its mouth. And behind every shot, a name. Still remembered. The trail south was barely a trail at all. Just a line of pressed earth where nothing brave enough to grow had survived the footfalls of passing men. It was quiet country, the kind where echoes traveled far and eyes watched from the ridges. I kept my pace even. Never fast. The trick wasn't speed, it was patience. 2 days into the canyon pass, the dust began to change. Lighter, thinner, like the bones of the land had been powdered by time. The wind carried it low, swirling around my boots, soft as ash. That's when I felt them. Not seen. Not heard. Just felt. like the weight of air shifting when someone steps close enough to touch. They were good. I'll give them that. I never heard the step, the breath, but the cold ran up my neck just the same. I stopped by an outcropping of stone, set the rifle down slow, kept my hands visible. Been following since the ridge, I said aloud. You're good, but you're not ghosts. The silence broke, just barely. Could have put one in your back, a voice said. You didn't. Thought about it. I smiled thinly. You won't get another shot. A figure emerged, face covered by a scarf, desert goggles. Tall, wiry, rifle cradled like he knew its weight intimately. Behind him, two more. Standard pattern. Flank and cover. I stayed still. Name's Mercer, the leader said. You're Blake. Used to be. You're on a list. I know. Mine. Good. His eyes narrowed behind the lenses. That doesn't trouble you? I shook my head. It should. Then why doesn't it? Because I'm not done remembering. He studied me a while. The men behind him fanned slightly, taking better angles. Professional. Mercer stepped closer. You killed my brother. I searched his face. Couldn't see it under the scarf, but the eyes were enough. Name? I asked. Jonas Mercer. I closed my eyes briefly. The name clicked. 312, I said softly. He was in the wrong place. He was 17. I nodded. Wrong place. You killed him anyway. I didn't apologize. There wasn't breath enough in the world for that. He had a rifle, I said. Because he was made to. Forced. I exhaled. The weight of it familiar. I know. Mercer's hands tightened on his weapon. Give me a reason not to do this, he said. I looked up, straight into his eyes. Because if you kill me, you'll forget his face. That made him flinch. I continued. I didn't forget. 379. I still see every one of them. He stood rigid, wrestling something inside. Anger, grief, whatever was left of a brother who'd lived as a shadow since the bullet found him. What was his last word? He asked. I swallowed. Searched the memory like a page torn but still readable. He said, Mama. Mercer's eyes glistened, just barely. And you shot him? I nodded. I had to. The wind carried dust between us. It moved like a veil hiding nothing. You remember them all? Mercer asked. All of them. Even my brother. Especially. He looked down, breath shaky. Then he lowered the rifle. You deserve worse than a bullet. I know. You'll die alone. I smiled faintly. That's the plan. He stared at me a long time. The men behind him shifted, uncertain. Then he said, We're done. No, I replied. We remembered. He didn't respond. Just turned, vanished back into the canyon. The others followed. I stood there a while longer, waiting to see if my shadow would stay. It did. I shouldered the rifle, walked on. By dusk, I reached the safe house Mason mentioned. An old ranger station half collapsed, but walls intact. Roof mostly sound. Enough. I built a small fire inside the hearth, careful not to smoke the air too heavy. The warmth was small, but it was more than nothing. I sat by the flames, cleaning my rifle again and let the names roll in my head. 379. I recited each one in silence, lips barely moving. Like prayer. Like penance. The snake tattoo felt warmer than the fire. Tomorrow, I'd keep walking. There was no map. No final town. Just the path forward. But tonight, I had the names. I'd keep them alive a while longer. Because when memory dies, the dead die twice. And I wasn't ready to let them go. Morning came as a dull gray. The sun didn't break through, just a pale sheet of light that seeped through the cracks in the station walls. I packed up before the fire had fully died. The air still held its warmth, but I didn't trust myself to linger. Time has a way of turning stillness into weakness. The road beyond the station wasn't marked. Just a cut through the brush, barely there except for the way the ground was flattened, like enough men had passed through to keep it visible. That was enough for me. I moved light. Packed tight to my shoulders, rifle strapped but reachable. Every so often I'd scan the hills, not because I feared Mercer would return, he wouldn't, but because every hunter knows, if one has your scent, another soon will. Halfway to the ridge, I found the bones. A shallow depression in the earth, rocks stacked with the careless reverence of someone who meant well but had no time. The wind had exposed them, ribs like twisted reeds, the skull half buried and eyeless. I stood over them a long while. A man once. Maybe more. No marker. No cross. No name. I knelt, pushed the rocks back into place, packed them tighter, raised a small cairn. 3 stones high, not because it meant anything, but because anything higher felt dishonest. I whispered, "You're remembered." Then I moved on. By noon, the road flattened out, leading to a township that barely earned the name. 5 buildings, all wood, half of them leaning like tired men in a storm. A rusted sign hung askew, Marlowe's End. A gas station stood at the far side, sign some bleached and letters half gone. The pump looked functional barely, but the station itself was still upright. Inside, an old man ran the counter, his skin leathered, his eyes sharp but uninterested. He watched me enter, gaze resting briefly on the rifle, then on the snake tattoo when I paid for water and a tin of beans. "You military?" "Used to be." He nodded once. "Ghost?" "Close enough." His eyes softened just a shade. "Plenty passed through here. Not many came back." "I won't either." "Fair." As I turned to leave, he added, "There's a church down the slope. Abandoned. But you might want to see it." "Why?" "Because ghosts go there." He didn't explain. I didn't ask. I followed his directions, south past the last house, down a slope where the dirt turned reddish like the ground had bled once and never healed. The church was stone, half collapsed. The bell still hung but cracked through the middle. Ivy swallowed what was left of the steeple. But there was sound. Not voices. Metal. I crept closer, silent through the grass. Inside, a man was fixing a rifle on a makeshift bench. His back to me, movements precise. He cleaned like I cleaned, by habit, not instruction. I stepped inside fully. "Hope you don't mind company," I said. The man didn't startle. He looked over his shoulder, eyes sharp. "You made no noise," he said. "I've had practice." He stood slowly. My height. Leaner. His hair was salt and pepper, his face worn but not broken. "Name's Cole." "Blake." Recognition sparked faintly in his eyes. "The snake." I nodded. He stepped closer, not threatening, just measuring. "I heard of you." "Black Viper." I was. "Not anymore?" "Still me." He nodded. "Same here. I was in the Jackals." "Recon." I remembered them. They went dark in '03. Half a unit written off. I never knew any survived. "Thought you were dead." "Close enough." We stood there in the church, 2 shades of what the military leaves behind. "What brings you here?" he asked. "Memory." He understood. Sat back on his bench. "There's names I can't forget," he said. "Figured this was as good a place as any to wait." "For what?" He smiled thin. "The ones coming to finish it." "Mercer," I said. He shook his head. "Different ones." "Mercs." "Old debts." I nodded. Understood without needing more. "You." "Same," I said. We sat quiet. The wind made the rafters groan. Then he asked, "You still shoot?" "Only when I have to." "You remember them all?" "Yes." "Good." He passed me a flask. The liquor was harsh, unrefined. It burned going down, but it burned honest. "Stay a while," he said. "There's room." I stayed. That night, we shared the names. Not all of them, but some. Like trading cards, only the damn collect. His list was long, like mine. He carried it quieter, but it was there. By the firelight, we cleaned weapons. Checked the perimeter. 2 old ghosts, waiting for the world to remember them just long enough to try and kill them. But until then, we carried the names. And we weren't done yet. By morning, the air shifted. Cole was already awake when I opened my eyes. He was by the doorway, scanning the horizon. The sky was bruised purple, the kind that promised a storm or something worse. "They'll come soon," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. Men like us feel these things. We packed quietly. Loaded weapons. Checked the corners of the church, the angles of approach. It wasn't fortification. It was ritual. You prepare because you must, even if the fight is already written. When we finished, we sat by the remnants of the altar. The light through the cracks painted stripes across the stone floor like shadows of a cage. Cole spoke first. "You think they'll remember our names?" I shook my head. "They'll remember someone was here. That's enough." He nodded. "Good." We waited. Hours passed in stillness. Then the sound of engines low, distant. More than one. I stood, rifle in hand. My breath was steady. The snake on my arm felt warm again. Cole smiled faintly. "Guess this is it." "No," I said. "This is remembrance." They came into view, 3 trucks, armed men. Not Mercer. Others. The ones who thought old ghosts should stay buried. We stood ready. 2 silhouettes in a broken church, waiting for the world to find us. I whispered to myself as the first truck stopped, as boots hit dirt, as shadows moved closer. 379. I loaded the first round. One more. Then I fired.